Today we are going to talk about phraseological units and their translation. So first of all, we have to identify what phraseological units are. So phraseological units are set expressions, and they are characterized by the following features. First of all, their content plane does not coincide with expression plane. Phraseological units are the units that have phraseological meaning, which does not usually depend on the meaning of the inner components. However, in some phraseological units, inner components can also realize their meaning. So let's look at the types of phraseological units. What phraseological units can we meet in a text? According to Vinogradov, there are three types of phraseological units: phraseological fusions, phraseological unities, and phraseological combinations. So what is the difference between them? The first type, phraseological fusions, represent the expressions that have only phraseological meaning, which cannot be derived from the inner components. The second type is phraseological unities. So phraseological unities, they are the set expressions that have only phraseological meaning as well, but their meaning can be derived, phraseological meaning can be derived from the meaning of the inner components. And the third type of phraseological unit is phraseological combinations. So phraseological combinations are phraseological units that have the both phraseological meaning and the meaning of the components. So the both meanings are realized in the text. So let's look closer at those types and consider some examples of them. Here on the screen, you can see phraseological fusions. Let's get acquainted with them. After some reflection, he decided to bite the bullet, break a leg, tit to tat. Once in a blue moon, I feel blue. It rains cats and dogs, man of war. So if you are not acquainted with this expression, so probably that will be impossible for you to understand their meaning. For example, the second phraseological unit, which is given here, break a leg, is actually used to wish luck, to wish good luck to a person. Or I feel blue means I'm sad, I don't feel well. So the word blue actually feels a sadness, but from the point of view of Russian language, it's quite illogical. We cannot see any logic between the color blue and the feeling of sadness. Or it rains cats and dogs. So it rains cats and dogs. That means it's raining hard. It's raining hard. But we cannot see again any connection between those animals, cats and dogs, and the type of rain. So it's the logic of that is not obvious. Or the last one, man of war. So man of war is actually a battleship. So it's a name of battleship, another word for battleship. Why do we call it a man of war? So we cannot explain it basing on the knowledge of Russian language, basing on the logic of Russian language. So let's consider the other type of phraseological units, phraseological unities. So as we have said before, phraseological unities represent phraseological units that have only phraseological meaning, but its meaning, this meaning can be derived from the meanings of the inner components. So here are some examples. Let's look at them. Don't beat around the bush. So he missed the boat. There he is, speak of the devil. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. And the last one, I'm sorry, but I just can't seem to wrap my head around it. So if we'll look at those phraseological units closely, so probably we'll be able to derive the meaning of them. So let's consider some of them. Let's take the last but one as an example. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. So what the phraseological unit may mean? So a bridge is obviously represents a kind of problem that we have to solve. So we will cross the bridge when we get there. That means we will solve the problem when we arrive to this, when we face this problem. So probably at that time, we will do something to solve it. Let's look at another example here. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. So it's quite close to a Russian proverb, to Russian phraseological unit. Последняя капля, которая переполняет чашу. So here it's obvious why straws were used here and what the phraseological unit is all about. So a camel can, this animal is used so that to transport some goods from one place to another, and we know that camel is a very strong animal. But it doesn't matter how strong you are if you have an excessive load. At some point, you may not cope with it. So probably there will be so even one straw, even one small problem can destroy you. So that's actually this is what what the phraseological unit means here. So, and what else? And probably the last one. I'm sorry, but I just can't seem to wrap my head around it. So to wrap head around something, that means to include something into your head. So when do we include something into our head? When we put something into our head, when we understand it, when we comprehend it. So as you can see, phraseological units can be explained. If we can be explained logically if we follow some simple logic. And the last phraseological units that we have here, phraseological combinations. So what do they represent? Let's remember. So phraseological combinations, those are word set expressions that have both phraseological meanings as well as the meanings of inner components. So the both meanings are realized in the text. So let's look at them. To make an attempt, to make haste, then to offer and apologize, to take part, bosom friend. So let's look at some of them. For example, bosom friend. One of the typical characteristics of phraseological combinations is that you can alter them. You can add some new words to them. You can alter their grammatical form. For example, bosom friend, you may say not only bosom friend, but bosom friends, for example. Or you can add some other components like my bosom friend. So bosom friend, bosom, this is our heart. So bosom friend, that means a friend which is in my heart. So it's quite close friend to me. To take part, that means to participate in something, right? We can actually change it. We can change the grammatical form of the word take, for example. We can say I took part, or we have taken part, and so on and so far. And next question that we are going to consider now is what should be the translation strategy when it comes to phraseological units. So what should we do? How should we approach the translation of this unit? So here on the screen, you can see a plan which consists of 4 stages or 4 steps. So what are the steps? The first step is identification of the phraseological unit. So you have to understand that the text or a part of text which you are translating contains a phraseological unit. So how to do that? It's quite easy. You have to look for illogical components. So if in a text you can see a word combination or a phrase which you cannot understand, and which seems to be illogical, so probably this is a phraseological unit. The next step is identification of the functional role. So it's very important to know what role the phraseological unit has in the text. So how to do that? To do that, you have to resort to different sources. That could be dictionaries and online dictionaries, for example, or you can even look them some uh, in some language corpuses. Then next one, the third stage is identification of the coloring. So you have to know what emotive, stylistic coloring the phraseological unit possesses. It is very important because probably you know that sometimes in English we can find some set expressions which uh, which are quite similar to the ones that we have in Russian language, but they are used rarely, or they're used in different situations. So you have to be aware um, of, of of the fact when we use these phraseological units, and what is their stylistic coloring. So is it appropriate to use them in official situation, for example, or it's absolutely colloquial one. So, or maybe it has neutral coloring. So in this case, you can use it in any situation, right? So after that, after you identify the functional role, after you identify the emotive and the stylistic coloring, and after consideration of the imagery of the phraseological unit, you have to choose a translation technique. So what are the translation techniques? We are going to consider them now. So the first the first translation technique is translation by identical phraseological unit. So here you can see on the screen some examples of that technique. So the first phraseological unit, which is given here, is to beat to bear one's cross. And in Russian, we have the same phraseological units, which have the same imagery, which has the same coloring, which has the same meaning. Нести свой крест. Next one is Achilles' heel, and in Russian we have identical phraseological unit Ахиллесова пята. Or the next one, the reverse side of the medal. And in Russian, we say обратная сторона медали. And the last one, as cold as ice. And in Russian, we also have a similar physiological unit. We say холодный как лед. So you can see that in some cases, translation of physiological units is not difficult because we already have ready physiological units that could be used in translation, because first of all, they have the same imagery, they have the same meaning, and they have the same coloring as here. So why does it happen that in two different languages we may have similar, not even similar, identical physiological units? This happens because they may have the same source. So the main sources of physiological units in English and Russian, I mean common sources in English and Russian, are Bible and some famous literary sources. For example, that could be Greek mythology or Roman mythology or Roman and Greek literature. So next technique that could be applied in translation of physiological units is translation by partial equivalent. So here again, you can see the examples of that. The first one, kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And in Russian, we say убить курицу, несущую золотые яйца. So you can see here that they're quite similar to each other. I mean, those phraseological units, with only one difference. In the first phraseological unit in English, the word goose is used, and in Russian we have kuritsa, which is chicken. So those are different animals, but in general, those two phraseological units are quite similar. So the second example here, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So in Russian equivalent, волк в овечьей шкуре. So it's obvious that the two phraseological units have the same meaning, quite similar imagery, with the only exception that in English we use clothing, and in the Russian translation, in the Russian equivalent, we use the word shkura. So this is the only difference between them. And the last example here, one swallow does not make summer, одна ласточка весны не делает. So once again, the two phraseological units are quite identical. They have the same imagery, they have the same meaning, with the only exception that in the English physiological unit, the word summer is used, and in its Russian equivalent, we use the word весна, which is spring, right? So what is the difference between the two techniques? The previous one, translation by full equivalent, and translation of by partial equivalent. So the first one, translation by full equivalent, usually does not cause any problems. Whereas the second one, translation by partial equivalent, may have caused some problems in cases when the imagery is somehow developed further in the text. For example, if in a text there's used a physiological unit to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, and then in the text the word goose is somehow used again. So in this case, it would be quite complicated to translate the sentence, because you cannot substitute it by убить курицу, несущую золотые яйца, because in this case, you will also have to substitute the word goose by the word chicken in the text курица, right? So next technique that could be applied for translation of phraseological unit is translation by analogous phraseological unit. So what is an analogous phraseological unit? This is a phraseological unit which has the same meaning but based on a different imagery. So let's look at some examples which are given on the screen. So the first one, catch somebody red-handed, and its possible translation is поймать на месте преступления. So we can see that the two phraseological units have the same meaning, but the meaning, I mean, the imagery of them is absolutely different. So here, поймать на месте преступления, that means to catch somebody on the crime spot, right? And to catch somebody red-handed, we can see that the imagery is different. The second example, which is given here, as like as two peas in the same spot, in the same pot, and it's equivalent, как две капли воды. So we can see that the two units have the same meaning, but imagery is different. So in the first phraseological unit, the word peas is used. So we know that the peas are quite identical to each other. They look the same, as well as two droplets. In Russian variant, we have как две капли воды. So every droplet looks like another one, right? So next example here, don't hello till you are out of the wood. Не говори гоп, пока не перепрыгнешь. So we also can see that they're similar, but the imagery is different. So next one, make hay while the sun shines. And in Russian, we say куй железо, пока горячо. So which actually means forge the iron while it's heated, or while it's hot. And so we can see that the difference between the two physiological units is only in imagery, but actually in general they have the same meaning. Translation by analogous phraseological unit may cause some trouble, so that we considered when we were talking about translation by a partial equivalent. If after this phraseological unit in the text, a part of the phraseological unit is somehow used. For example, some word is used or developed further in the text. So in this case, a translator may have a problem because you cannot substitute an original phraseological unit by some analogous in this case, because the text will lose its meaning. So next technique which can be applied in translation of phraseological unit is calc translation. So calc translation actually represents a word-for-word translation. It's when we translate literally a phrase into another language. So let's look at some examples which are given on the screen. Love me, love my dog. Любишь меня, люби и мою собаку. So we can see that the Russian, we just translated the English phraseological unit into Russian literally. In what cases it is possible to use calc translation? It is possible only in cases when the logic of the original physiological unit is obvious for a receptor of the target language. Only in this case we can translate it literally. So next technique that could be applied for translation of physiological unit is parallel translation. So parallel translation represents a literal translation of the original physiological unit and then its explanation. An explanation of a physiological unit can be given both in the text or outside the text. For example, it could be given in footnotes. Let's look at an example of it, which is given on the screen. It was raining cats and dogs, and a little puppy got on my page. So Russian translation is был такой дождь, будто, как говорят англичане, с неба сыпались кошки и собаки, и один маленький щенок упал мне на страницу. So here we can see that a phraseological fusion, which usually does not have which is not clear for a receptor, is translated nevertheless literally, but here in the text the explanation of that is given. So that is why it's not a problem for a receptor to understand the meaning of that. Next type of technique that could be used for translation of phraseological units is explication. Explication, in other words, it's explanation of phraseological units, explanation of the meaning, of their meaning. In the examples given on the screen, we can see actually explication. So let's look at them. Peeping Tom, человек с нездоровым любопытством, тайно следящий за другими. So we can see that the phrase usually is much bigger. The translated phrase is much bigger than the original one. To fiddle while Rome is burning. To fiddle while Rome is burning. Заниматься пустяками перед лицом серьезной опасности. So again, the imagery is not actually explained here, but the meaning of the phraseological unit is explained. Ships and that pass in the night, мимолетные встречи. So again, we can see that in this case, phraseological unit is translated by a phrase which is not a phraseological unit in the target language. It's just an explanation, a sentence that gives you understanding of what was meant in the original sentence. This kind of technique can be used in cases the other types of techniques cannot be applied. And now we are going to talk about stylistic devices and their translation. First of all, we have to identify what stylistic devices are. Stylistic devices, or tropes, represent linguistic means that serve to make a definite impact on the receptor. So what could be the impact? Impact could be evoking some emotions, feelings, or some reaction. For example, it could be laughing. Stylistic devices are predominantly used in literary texts. As for the translation of stylistic devices, they could be offered the following strategy. Here on the screen, you can see 3 steps. The first step is identification of the device. So first of all, you have to understand that the part of the text which you are translating represents a stylistic device. Then second step is estimation of the value and effect of the device. So you have to understand, you have to know what kind of effect is expected when a reader encounters this device. And the last one, creation of the similar stylistic device or neutralization of the device. Neutralization of the device, that means you do not try to reproduce the device, but you use explication instead. So explication, in other words, it's explanation. So now we are going to look at some of stylistic devices, some types of stylistic devices, see what do they represent and what kind of effect they produce. The first stylistic device that we are going to consider is simile. Simile represents a comparison of objects belonging to different types, to different categories. So what does it mean that they belong to different categories? For example, if we compare a human being to a human being, that would not be a simile. Or if we compare an animal to an animal, it's not a simile. So simile, it's when you compare a human being to an animal, for example, or a human being to a plant or an object. Here on the screen, you can see some examples of an example of a simile in yellow color, right? So the example is actually an extract from A Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that sweetly played in tune. So here you can see that the word love is compared to rose. Love and rose belong to different categories. Love is a feeling, is an abstract notion, and rose is a real object, a plant. So why do authors use simile? So simile is needed to emphasize some qualities of objects or notions. Some objects may possess an obvious quality, and when we compare this object to another object, so the quality of the former is transferred to another one. Let's look at some other examples of similes. Don't just sit there like a bump on a log. This dress is perfect because it fits like a glove. She is as thin as a rake. I am so thirsty that my throat is as dry as a bone. He is as funny as a barrel of monkeys. And the last one. Watching the show was like watching grass grow. So probably you notice that the second example here does not feed the rule that we compare objects belonging to different categories, because here in the second example the word dress is compared to glove. The both words represent garments, they represent types of clothing. So that's why we must say that in this example, it is just a simple comparison, but it's not a simile. So next stylistic device that we are going to consider is metaphor. So what is metaphor? Metaphor is also a comparison, but what is the difference between metaphor and simile? In simile, we use special constructions that that show that we compare two objects. We just compare them. In metaphor, the metaphor is realized through identification. So we do not say that an object is like an object, is like some other object. We say that the object is another object. So metaphor is actually used for the same reason. Some object may possess a quality and like more obvious quality, and when we compare one object to another, this quality is transferred to the other word. So let's look at one example of metaphor, which is in yellow color. On the shore of the wild world I stand alone, and I think till love and fame to nothingness do sing. So what we can see here, love and fame to nothingness do sing. Love and fame are compared to a ship. So because love and fame, they are abstract notions. They cannot sing in the water, right? So what can sing? Only ships, only some vessels. So love and fame are compared to ships, some vessels that can sink. So what does it mean to sink? It means to be destroyed or vanish. Let's look at some other examples. I'm drowning in a sea of grief. So grief is compared to sea in which you can drown. That means to be overwhelmed by grief, overwhelmed. Then she was fishing for compliments. That means she was trying to get compliments by using some tricks. That's what you do when you fish. You want to catch fish by using some special devices, some special tricks. Success is a sense of achievement. It is not an illegitimate child. Then another example, it's raining men. That's a word from a famous song. Probably you know it. She has such a bubbly personality. Or the last one, this is the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake. So what does it mean? Icing is the most the most favorite part of a cake for many people. Something that you can see on top of a cake, right? So now we are going to look at some ways to translate metaphors. The first way is through reproducing the same image in the target language. And below you can see an example, ray of hope, луч надежды. So we can see that the both expression have the same image and meaning. So in what situations can we use these kind of translation? We can use it in case in the target language there already exists a similar expression, a similar metaphor, or in cases when a literal translation of an expression will be clear for the target language receptor. Next way is through replacing the image in the source language with a standard target language image. And here we have examples of that. Let's read the ones which are given below. Ноги как ватные, legs like jelly. So here you can see that two different images are used. In Russian, we use the word vata, right? And in English, we use the word jelly. Even though the expressions have different images, they still have the same meaning. The tongue is a fire, язык как бритва. So in the original, the tongue is compared to fire, and in its translation in Russian, it is compared to a razor, right? We can see that different images are used. So why is it not possible to use the first way of translation here? Because if we translate it literally, the words will lose its meaning. They will not be clear for the target language receptor. That's why we have to find some metaphors that already exist in the target language. Next way to translate metaphors is through translating by similes, retaining the image. For example, books are mirrors. Книги как зеркало. So you already know that similes represent the comparison of objects belonging to different categories. And they are quite similar to metaphors, with the only difference that metaphors are realized through identification and similes are realized through comparative constructions. For example, here in translation, you can see the word как is used. So как is translated into English as like. So the books are like a mirror, right? Explication is another method of translating metaphors. So explication, in other words, it is explanation when we do not substitute a metaphor by another metaphor, but express the meanings through explanation. Here you can see an example of that. I guess I keep hoping that if we stay right where we are, she'll come back and we can turn the clock back. And translation into Russian is: Мне кажется, я все еще надеюсь, что если мы останемся здесь, это вернется и все будет как прежде. So in the original, you can see that the metaphor that there's used the metaphor we can turn the clock back, right, which cannot be rendered into English into Russian through literal translation or through another metaphor which has another image but the same meaning. So we cannot do that because in Russian we do not have actually a metaphor with the same meaning. So that's why the author of the translation decided to use explanation of the meaning of the metaphor. So next way to translate metaphors is deletion or reduction. So that means that in translation, in the translated text, there will not be a metaphor, any metaphor. It will not be given in the target text. So in what cases it is possible to apply this kind of method? So a deletion of a metaphor can be justified only on the ground that the metaphor's function is being fulfilled elsewhere in the text, as you can see it on the screen. Next way to translate metaphors through parallel translation. So what is parallel translation? It represents a calc translation with explanation of its meaning. Calc translation is literal translation of a phrase, and then you explain it. The explanation can be given inside the text, or it can be given outside, for example, in footnotes. In what cases do we use parallel translation? We use it in cases we are not sure that the translated metaphor will have necessary effect, or we are not sure if it will be clear for the receptor. So another stylistic device that we are going to consider now is epithet. Epithet represents an attribute that influences the expressive value of a word. And here you can see also translation tips. It is necessary to consider carefully the denotative and connotative meaning of a word. So what is denotative and connotative meaning? Denotative meaning is actual or primary meaning of the word, the main meaning of a word. And connotative meaning is a supplementary additional meaning of a word. It can express coloring. It can express some stylistic value of the word or figurative meaning. While translating epithets, we may encounter 4 problems. So what are they? The first problem is enantiosemy, then transferred qualifiers, inverted epithets, and gradation of epithets. Let's look at all of them. Enantiosemy represents the following. It's when paradoxical, it's a paradoxical actually meaning when 2 opposing meaning are realized at the same time. Below you can see an example of enantiosemy. Let's look at it and see how it is translated into Russian. My good fellow, любезный ты мой. So what do we see here? We see that the word good here is used in 2 meanings. Actually, what is meant by the author is that the person is not good. Quite opposite is meant here. That the fellow is bad, actually, or a nice place to live away from. So it's ну и местечко. This is the translation into Russian. So it's obvious that the author does not mean that the place is really nice. So he means quite opposite, that the place is very bad to live in. Or the last example, a pretty story. So the story is not actually pretty. The author means that it's a bad story. That was a bad occasion, for example. So that's why we translated into Russian хорошенькая же история. Another problem is translation of transferred qualifiers. It is when epithets syntactically joined to a word to which it does not belong logically. So let's look at some of the examples here. He ran a tired hand through his hair, and the translation is устало он провел рукой по волосам. Here the word tired is used as an attribute to the word hand, but we should understand that a hand cannot be tired. A person is tired, and a hand is a part of this of the person, right? And in Russian, устало он провел рукой по волосам. The word устало is actually referred to the person itself. So we can see that when we encounter transferred qualifiers, in many cases, we have to identify to whom or to what the epithet belongs to, and we have to express it in translation in an obvious way. Another example, a British breakfast of depressing kidney and fish. Наводящий тоску завтрак из почек и рыбы. So again, we can see that the word depressing is used with the words kidney and fish, but actually kidney and fish cannot be depressing, right? So the person is depressed when he is eating it. Okay, so next problem that we can encounter is translation of inverted epithets. Inverted epithets represent the following. It's when the head word of the expression actually represents a modifier, and the dependent word is actually represents head word. So let's look at an examples. A darling of a girl or a bear of a man. So here the word darling is used as a head word, but actually it's an attribute to the word girl or a bear of a man. Here the word bear is used as the head word, but actually it is the word man is a head word, and the word bear is an attribute to it. And translations of those expressions are прелестнейшая девушка, не человек, а медведь, right? Then gradation of epithets can also cause some troubles in translation of epithets. So in English, gradation is based on rhythmical sequence, and in Russian, this device is mostly logic-centered. Let's look at some examples of it. Privacy is viewed as a requirement which all humans would find equally necessary, desirable, and satisfying. So please pay attention to the sequence of the words. Necessary, desirable, and satisfying, and the way they are pronounced. Then let's look at its translation. Частная жизнь — это требование, которое абсолютно все люди считают положительным, необходимым и желательным. So again, pay attention to the sequence of the words положительным, необходимым и желательным. So probably you noticed that the sequence is different. It is explained by the fact that in Russian, it would be more logical to put them in this order. So we have some logic basis for distribution of attributes. Another stylistic device that we are going to consider is pun. So pun represents a phenomenon when words are used in more than one meaning. So let's look at an example of it. She had a photographic memory but never developed it. So you can see that the word develop and photographic are used in two meanings. The first meaning is related to the topic memory, and the second one is related to the topic photography, photos, right? Because to develop may mean to improve, but also it may mean to make, if we talk about pictures, if we talk about photos. So other examples of a pun you can see on the screen. Allusion. Allusion is the next stylistic device that we are going to consider today. Allusion represents a reference to an event or a work. Here you can see two examples of it. Let's look at the shortest one, which is given below. Mildred ran from the parlor like a native fleeing an eruption of Vesuvius. So probably you know the story of Vesuvius and its eruption. So if you are aware of the event, of this historical event, you can understand this. You can understand this illusion. But if you are not aware of that, you will have troubles with that. So in translation of allusion, you have to first of all be able to identify it, to see that here there is a reference to some event or a work. And after that, if you are not aware of the reference, you have to search for additional information so that to translate the word or expression correctly. So here you can see other examples of allusion. Next stylistic device that we are going to consider is metonymy. Metonymy represents a phenomenon when a part stands for the whole. Let's look at some examples here. The White House will be making an announcement around noon today. So the house itself cannot make any announcement. It's obvious. But here, the word White House is used in the meaning of people who work in White House, in the White House. Or the next one. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare, right? Here, the word ears means your attention, because ears, this is a part of body. This is a part of body or ear, which is used when we listen to someone. So Julius Caesar wants the Romans to listen to him. So that's why he says, lend me your ears, please give me your attention. So that's what actually the phrase means.